The Peach Bowl is right around the corner. Georgia headed to what is essentially a home game with some air conditioning and a roof. Peach Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia against the Ohio State Buckeyes. Just backed on into the playoffs. I promise you, they're making no apologies for being there. In a game like this, it's not always the star players that have the game of their life. I mean, sometimes you do see that. I mean, big-time players make big-time plays in big-time games. You've heard that nursery rhyme before. But in games like this, when you double cover the top wide receiver, or where you try to take away the run game, or you try to take away their fastball, a lot of the times it's the X factors in these sort of games that step up in a big way. We broke this same kind of game down in Ohio State, Michigan, told you the X factors. I'm just going to keep it a buck. We nailed it. Cornelius Johnson had a day. That was the big X factor that we had. So I think you'll want to make sure you're locked in for this one. A.D. Mitchell is my first X factor in this game. He's the receiver at Georgia. Coming into the year, they thought he might kind of be their alpha dog, kind of be their go-to wide receiver outside of Brock Bowers on the outside. And he brings some 50-50 possibilities for you. What I mean by that is there's been multiple occasions against Oregon to open the year, against Alabama to end last year in the national title game, where Stetson Bennett drops back, puts the ball in the air, and you see A.D. Mitchell go full Sports Center, you got Moss kind of mode, and just take that defensive back to school because he scored a touchdown on him. Like, that's the kind of potential now that you have at wide receiver. You still have weapons in Brock Bowers. You still have weapons in Ladd McConkey and Darnell Washington. But if A.D. Mitchell is able to be fully healthy, fully in sync with Stetson Bennett, that adds a whole new layer to this offense. Even more so, adds a whole nother problem to the Ohio State to-do list. And the more and more problems you have on that to-do list, the less efficiently and least effectively, rather, you can answer all those and get all those done. So A.D. Mitchell, a guy to watch in this game. And also, by the way, Ohio State's corner play, it's been inconsistent. Hasn't been bad throughout the year, but they've given up 300 and 278 the last two games. So they've got their work cut out for them. I think A.D. Mitchell could be a guy that you see pop in a big way in this game with Brock Bowers likely seeing a lot of defensive attention, as well as Darnell Washington. So keep an eye on A.D. Mitchell as he gets back in his bag for the Georgia Bulldogs. For Ohio State, Tommy Eichenberg, linebacker, is another X factor. He's going to have his work cut out for them. And the reason why I think he's an X factor is because of what he will be asked to do by this Ohio State defense. You're going to ask him to fill the run, so tackle Kenny McIntosh, tackle Dejan Edwards, tackle Milton. But he's also going to have to help in the pass game as well. Going to have to be able to keep the underneath routes more or less taken care of, if that makes sense. Because there's a lot of dink and dunk they like to do to Brock Bowers and to Darnell Washington. And you know whose responsibility that is then? The linebackers. And Tommy Eichenberg being the linebacker, or the lead linebacker rather, for Ohio State, he's going to have a really solid game. Because here's what you want to avoid for Ohio State. What you would want to avoid is Georgia starts running the football and they start breaking off gains. 4 yards here, 5 yards there, 6 yards there. What happens then when Georgia starts rolling on the ground? Well, then you have to allocate more resources. You have to bring the safety down. You have to add in another linebacker, whatever it is. You have to be able to stack that box a little bit more. So when that happens, you have less people playing in the secondary to stop the big play. And if Georgia starts hitting big plays in the pass game, it's going to be tough to keep pace at that point, okay? So how do you keep from having to allocate extra resources? Tommy Eichenberg, fill quick, fast, in a hurry, make the stops, and force it to be a reasonable down and distance for the Ohio State defense in terms of what they can play. So Tommy Eichenberg, absolutely an X factor in this kind of game. If you have not yet subscribed, we want you at the party. Ohio State fans, Georgia fans, a lot of you joined us this year. We're so glad you're here. If you haven't yet joined the party, now is the time. Water's fine. Jump on in. Another X factor in this game, Broderick Jones, left tackle for Georgia. Now, he's going to have his work cut out for him because he has to block either JT Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer the entirety of the day. And just imagine the sort of situation you could be in if, for whatever reason, JT Tuimoloau goes out and has a game like he had against Penn State. Or Jack Sawyer is a guy that we've been waiting to call his name a lot this year. Let's suppose he pops off in the college football playoff, in that semifinal game, kind of has his coming out party. If they're able to, one, just get to Stetson Bennett in general and force longer down and distances, that's just bad for your offense. It's not where you want to operate out of. Worst case scenario, you end up giving up a strip sack, maybe 2 strip sacks. Well, then Ohio State and that offense have a little bit more ammunition to play with. So Broderick Jones will have a big responsibility having to neutralize one, if not both of those guys on the defensive edges for Ohio State. But if he can be a stable bookend for them, and Georgia can operate offensively just business as usual, will not have to stress too much about that pass rush. You're going to force Ohio State to try and manufacture a rush. You're going to have to dial up blitzes. When you dial up a blitz on Stetson Bennett, he is so poised and so experienced to where he will pick you apart. So Broderick Jones, if you can hold your own, especially in the first half, it's going to pay dividends later in the game. The final X factor for me in this one, Ohio State's wide receiver, Emeka Egbuka. It's no secret, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a freak. In fact, for our program awards here on this channel, he won Freak of the Year. That award is in the mail, Marvin, I believe. But Emeka Egbuka, I believe, will have to step up big time in this game, because if I'm Georgia and if I'm looking at this thing the correct way, I'm giving extra attention to Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, if we're losing this game, it's not because Marvin Harrison Jr. is mossing our defensive backs. It's not losing one-on-one to him. It's not letting C.J. Stroud just absolutely put it up and let him go make a play. And they try to do that, quite frankly. I mean, I think he leads the country, saw this out the other day, he leads the country in single coverage touchdowns. With like 11 touchdowns when you try to man him up with just one person. So let's be real here. You probably need to allocate some extra resources to Marvin Harrison Jr. So when that happens, somebody else has got to make a catch for you. The guy that I'm looking at, like I already mentioned, Emeka Egbuka, who looked good in the Michigan game. I think he needs the game of his season so far in this game against Georgia to be able to keep this defense off balance and allow Ohio State, allow the really strength of Ohio State's offense to dictate the tempo to Georgia and allow C.J. Stroud to have somebody else to throw the rock to. I know you got Stover. I know that he is a factor at the very least for Ohio State's offense, but with what Emeka Egbuka brings from a speed perspective and helping stretch the field, if you don't have Marvin Harrison Jr., I think he's the guy that you want to see step up for you. So to recap it, A.D. Mitchell for Georgia, huge X factor. If he can be that 50-50 ball extraordinaire for you that you haven't had available this year, really, to be honest, because he's been hurt, that would be huge and take advantage of a potential inconsistent spot against Ohio State's corners. Tommy Eichenberg, linebacker for Ohio State. If you can hold your own in the run, big fella, we don't have to allocate more in the run game, and we try to minimize then Georgia's explosive plays through the pass. So Tommy Eichenberg, a hinge factor and an X factor, if you want to put it that way. Broderick Jones, left tackle for Georgia, will have to hold it down on the edges. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are some freaks, but if you can hold it down in the first half, they may get impatient, may start to dial it up more, and that's advantage Stetson Bennett. Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr. should get some extra attention. We need you to step up when things aren't going our way in the pass game. If we can't get it to Marvin Harrison Jr., we need you to be that guy to stretch the field if you're Ohio State. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. We're going to break it down, going to predict it here in the very near future, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel. But the Peach Bowl is just around the corner. Transfer portal season turned up, recruiting season all the way turned up. The bowl games and the college football playoff is still about to get going, so don't let them distract you. We'll break it all down when it gets here. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.